everyone. Well, if you have been on standard American diet, I think this session would really help you to understand how to get on plant-based diet. And that's the topic today. We are going to be discussing with Natalie Castro, who is a registered dietitian, and she herself has been on plant-based diet for over 10 years. Welcome, Natalie.
Hi, thank you. I'm so excited to be here. Yes, plant-based nutrition, we can talk so much about it.
I know. And then you wonder, our grandparents, I remember my grandmother, I mean, obviously at that time there was no standard American diet, but, it was always plant-based, and what the heck happened, And here we are learning from the beginning as to what exactly is plant-based diet when our grandparents were doing that.
Exactly. Or just going back to like the roots of things, right? Where things weren't so convenient and processed and loaded with a bunch of extra things that we don't need, where we're just, using whole foods to really nourish our bodies. So important. And I think a lot of people are gravitating back towards that because they realize that, these processed foods are not doing them any good. So they're looking for ways to actually start to incorporate some of these items back into their diet. But because we've had the standard American diet for so long, it's so hard, right, to make those changes because it's not as easy or readily available, I guess, in some cases.
So how do we get started? What is your recommendations?
So I always tell my patients, start where you can. Everybody's always going to be at a different level. Everybody has a unique case. So some people like to go cold turkey and just go for things. I myself started gradually when I wanted to make changes. I started by just removing certain food groups that I knew were a little bit difficult, or easier, I guess I could say. So one of them being yogurt and eggs were things that were a little more complicated for me to take out. So, the chicken and the meat, that was easy. But, because we had beans, but the other option was, I still had some yogurt and eggs. And a lot of patients feel like they might not be able to make those changes because they feel like they still have these items that they rely on. So I always say, start off where you can. If we start off with an 80-20 concept and we're trying to at least 80% of what we're eating being more plant-based, more vegetables, more grains, more nuts, more seeds, more beans and legumes and tofu, if we can incorporate 80% of what we eat with those options, then we still have those 20% that is still in our favor. And that's really where the research shows that the most benefit of the plant-based diet can still be that percentage. So it doesn't have to be 100% right at the very beginning. Or, maybe you choose that you just want to be 80-20 and you're happy with that. Then that is where the research is showing that the most benefit for plant-based can be.
So now, what is the difference between plant-based diet and vegan?
Yes, so it can be confusing. There's a lot of similarities. So I like to say that, being more plant forward from a health perspective, that's really what we want to target for, using food as medicine and treating inflammation. So there's things like I work with a lot of patients with inflammatory bowel disease where we use a plant-based diet to help us, avoid any flare-ups. And then veganism really has, it's very similar, right? Where you're not eating the animal proteins, but at the same time, you're also very into the animal rights. So it's really like when you're talking about menu items, there are going to be a lot of similarities. And the difference between using, things like leather and animal-derived products in your household will also be a form of veganism. And I think the other part is, even things like honey would not be considered okay on a vegan diet, whereas in a plant-forward diet or plant-based diet, that might be okay for some people.
Oh, I see. And then the vegetarian is vegetarian means you can have yogurt, right?
Right. So then vegetarian is another definition. And again, so all of these can be plant forward diets, right? That's what we're trying to achieve, that 80-20%, where we're trying to increase how much of the vegetables and the plant-based foods we're incorporating in. But what we classify as or what we have really depends on the individual. So vegetarian standard menus might include things like dairy, eggs, and fish. So we have the pescatarians that include the fish in there. Not everybody eats fish. And the same thing. So you might pick and choose, okay, dairy, no, not for me, but I will have an egg every once in a while. Or some of my patients will then have like products that are made with those items, but not necessarily like scrambled eggs, for example, but they might have a piece of bread that does have that.
Got it. So let's just talk about what would it look like from a breakfast to lunch to dinner if someone is on a plant-based diet? I mean, give your example. That's the best.
Right. So basically trying to put in those options that you can have. So like, let's just use, I live in Miami, so we have a very big Hispanic population, and beans are very common in the diet. So I have a lot of patients that are familiar with eating rice and beans, but there's always some kind of animal protein, right? So just starting off and saying, well, you don't really need that animal protein on there. So just have your vegetables, your rice and your beans, and some side salad. That would make a completely balanced and nutritious meal. So it's just a matter of trying to do, I would start off with one meatless meal per day. So sometimes breakfast can be that option, but we want to incorporate some of those higher nutrient plant-based foods. So like a lot of people say, oh, I have cereal, and then I'll use a plant-based milk. But what nutrients can you add to that? So you want to have some fresh fruit, maybe some granola, low in sugar, or maybe some hemp seeds, for example, which are a great source of plant proteins. And then you sprinkle that on so that you're making sure you're getting that balance between all of the nutrients and you're not missing out.
Got it. And let's just talk about you were mentioning earlier about the research, right? So let's just talk about the benefits of going on a plant-based diet.
Yeah, so as far as the research, we're showing that the decrease in inflammation has really helped, even things like cancer, decrease in hypertension, for example. So the more vegetables that we eat, the lower our blood pressure gets, where it's really the sodium-potassium balance that occurs. So if somebody has hypertension or high blood pressure, what happens is by increasing the amount of potassium in our foods, which is natural in our fruits and our vegetables and in our whole grains, it lowers the amount of sodium that we're processing. So just in that simple change, by increasing the amount of fiber and plant-based foods or potassium-rich foods will help us naturally decrease that. So it's definitely a plus there. The same thing with cholesterol. So the more fiber that we have in our diet, the cleaner our blood can get by eliminating the cholesterol that we're eating or that might be in our bloodstream, right? So it just naturally, the plant steroids and what we're eating will eliminate that. So with most chronic conditions, we have seen an improvement with a lot of, with following a plant-based diet. And most recently, there was actually a really great linkage between Alzheimer's and just our brain health and on a plant-based diet. So the more, again, veggies that we can eat. We've been promoting vegetables for a very long time. So now it's just a matter of taking a look at how we can make at least one meal a day to be completely plant-based.
So now, do you also recommend cooking fresh every time you eat a plant-based meal?
Right. So that's a great point too. So what happens though, so because things become so popular and we're living this fast-paced life, we're always looking for convenience, right? We don't have time to cook. Cooking has become, like we talked about our grandmothers, being in the kitchen and cooking that home cooked meal. We tend, as a population, we don't seem to have as much time anymore. And that's where we've also fallen into kind of the trap of reaching for convenient food. So there are a lot of options on the market, but when you take a look at their ingredient list, is it really much better than, something else that we would have eaten? So we still need to take account into that, even though it might be vegan or gluten-free or, free of things that, the manufacturer is labeling it as. We still need to look to see what ingredients it's made out of. And the most nutritious is gonna be our whole foods plant-based. So that means things that are naturally grown from the earth, that they're fresh fruits and vegetables, again, looking at those whole grains instead of the processed grains, and then making fresh meals out of them, because so then we have the control of what we're putting in our food and what we essentially put into our body. If we're just going into the freezer aisle and finding some, ready to eat items, there has to be something in that is preserving it. Right. So while there are very few really good, clean items out there that can help us in the convenience section, we need to be mindful that a lot of these companies are now hearing that plant-based is on a trend and are making, unfortunately, some options not so healthy for us. So we just have to be careful with the sodium. You want to look for the sodium content. You want to look at the fat content. A lot of things are made with coconut oil, and it just is a lot of fat, which is still saturated fat, which we're trying to eliminate from the animal proteins. But then it could still cause health issues later down the line.
Well, so as far as cooking oil now, that's another question. What type of plant cooking oil that we should use?
Yeah, so I always get this question. People really like oil, apparently. Maybe it's something easy that we target. I actually don't use a lot of oil in my cooking, so it's not necessarily a big factor in my diet, right? So what we keep on hand a high quality olive oil. There are some controversies between using it to cook, but again, I always find the purpose of using oil in cooking is basically to just moisten the pan so that the food doesn't stick. Right? And there's many ways to do that without even using oil. So you can just throw in your vegetables and keep a low heat and then add a little bit of water, and that creates the same effect as adding oil. So you don't really need to cook with oil to begin with. And if we're making a salad, for example, we definitely want to have a healthy fat. So this is where that high quality olive oil would come in to add to, as a salad dressing, homemade salad dressing versus something that comes in a bottle, right? So we have those options. If you're looking for like a quick spray, something even like avocado oil would be, something that you can quickly use just to keep your pans moist. But the whole purpose here is that we're using something that isn't in a big quantity, right? So, if you wanted to use an organic canola oil, for example, just a small amount, because that's the only thing you can source, it's not going to be the end of the world, right? Because it's just the amount. We avoid frying food because that just changes the whole properties of stuff. So you don't want to take a healthy thing and fry it and add a bunch of oil to it. But yes, so, and then there's just this big trend about using coconut oil. So even though it's a plant-based option, again, if we're adding a ton of it, it's going to be a saturated fat, which then could lead to other issues down the line. So a little bit of coconut oil is perfectly fine. Just like I said, it's the amount that we really need to worry about.
And what are the macro and micronutrients? Can we get all these from the plant-based diet?
Definitely. So once upon a time, there was a belief that we we're lacking something. But the beauty of it is making sure that we're getting a variety of things. So oftentimes I hear of patients who started off on a plant-based diet, and they're thinking, well, I've eliminated the animal protein, but I don't really like beans, and I don't like the taste of tofu. So when I analyze their diet, they're not getting any protein. They're getting very little protein sources, because the protein source from plant-based really should be those beans, legumes, nuts, seeds, and tofu. So if you're not having them, especially my patients that are worried about digestive issues, and a lot of people steer clear from beans because they feel like they become gassy. And actually, it's very common for people to experience that, because if they've never eaten beans before and suddenly they start eating them, well, guess what? Our body actually doesn't know what to do with it because it hasn't had it in so long. So I work with my patients to gradually introduce these foods into their diet so that the body can start to accept it. So if you think about our body having different enzymes, we have the enzymes, we were born with them, but some of them might be in storage. So we got to pull them out. And the way we do that is by slowly introducing foods. Unfortunately, what happens is somebody might have a big bowl of something or go to a restaurant that was heavy in like black beans or something like that, and then they get a bad reaction, and then they feel, oh no, I don't tolerate beans. And sometimes it's just in the way they're prepared, or like I said, just too much at one sitting.
Wow, that's great. A lot of information, a lot of great information for all of us who want to get started on plant-based diet, right? Anything else that you'd like to add?
Nope. Well, I mean, there's probably more I could speak about. But I just to take home, I think that the biggest thing is if you're interested in starting on a plant-based diet, I say kudos to you, and just starting off with, trying to incorporate some of these naturally whole foods, plant-based options into your diet. And when I talk about whole grains, I mean things like wild rice, brown rice, quinoa, adding a little bit more variety to those things that you're already eating and seeking. And then if you do have any kind of reactions to things, just taking it down, just trying 1 teaspoon at a time or 1 tablespoon of that new food as you introduce it.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. I mean, especially you talked so much about the research and the benefits of going on a plant-based diet, right? For so many other chronic conditions, definitely as a society, as a population, we are becoming more aware of the benefits of plant-based diet.
Right. Yep. And I think, and more options, more restaurants are becoming more aware. So that's really good. They're hearing our demand. So it's going to make it a lot easier to eat out. And then even with menus, you could even take a look at a menu and kind of find some things that are appropriate. You might have to ask them to make some modifications for you, but most places you can find some options.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Natalie, for joining us. To all the viewers, get at least started slowly on a plant-based diet, and let us know, let us know your feedback. What are you cooking with? What are you cooking? So we would love to get your feedback on how you get started on the plant-based diet journey. With that, thank you so much, Natalie, for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Nice to meet everyone.